Hey, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Hey, this is a conundrum. Are you ready? Businesses, schools, stores, restaurants, churches, all wide open in Florida. In California, they've got a strict lockdown, terrible damage in the economy. They've recalled the governor. But which state has the fewest number of COVID cases and the lowest death rate? You may be very surprised at these findings. Jenna Browder has the story.
It's a study of two states with two very different approaches to the pandemic and about the same outcome. Florida, open for business. California, on lockdown.
Florida schools are open, and we are one of only a handful of states in which every parent has the right to send their child to school in person.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, in his State of the State address this month, says schools are open. California Governor Gavin Newsom says schools there are working to reopen.
Working together with parents and teachers and school leaders, we've turned the conversation from whether to reopen to when.
Newsom ordered the nation's first statewide COVID shutdowns and continues to maintain a mask mandate. Indoor dining and other activities are strictly limited too. Meanwhile, Florida has no statewide restrictions, and DeSantis is not allowing cities to fine people who don't wear masks.
Every business in Florida has a right to operate. Over these many months, we've stood up for small, family-owned businesses and have saved thousands of them from ruin.
Because California, we're not going to come crawling back. We will roar back.
And it might be all for naught. The CDC says since COVID began, California and Florida have had nearly the same case rate, around 8,900 for every 100,000 people. The death rate, too, has Florida ranked 27th among states, California 28th. And in terms of unemployment, right now Florida sits at 5.1%, California 9.3%.
I've been to those two states in the last month. It's like, you know, Venus and Mars.
Economist Stephen Moore on CBN's News Watch.
I mean, Florida's open for business. The schools are open. The stores are open. The restaurants are open. The churches are open. People are getting up and about. And California, just the opposite. Everything's pretty much locked down.
CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson says it's a question of human behavior and responsibility.
The question is, can the government control human behavior, or should we rely on self-control? And as Steve pointed out, Florida has an extremely high number of senior citizens. And what we saw in Florida were these senior citizens controlling themselves, locking themselves down, if you will.
California's reopening is expected to pick up steam in April, but it comes as Republicans there help to organize a recall against the governor that so far collected about 2 million signatures. That's 500,000 more than they need before tomorrow's deadline. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
You know, the thing of it is, folks, it's not science. I appreciate Tucker Carlson pointing out the fact that the 6 feet of separation was the result of a dead Italian whose theory was probably debunked now, but you don't need 6 feet. 3 feet does about as much good as 6. And yet everything is 6 feet in the schools, 6 feet here, there, and the other. Why? There's no science to it. It's just amazing. But the fact that California has locked it down and DeSantis in Florida has opened it up and the death rate is not one bit different, and yet the unemployment rate is almost double in California than it is in Florida. Amazing. You know, the Democrats like to control people's lives. And if we just leave people alone, they'll take care of themselves, and that's the way it ought to be. Well, in other news, the AstraZeneca vaccine for COVID, is it any good? More and more countries have shut down using it. So is it dangerous? John Jessup has more.
Pat, a host of European nations are halting the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine over safety concerns. The vaccine is not in use in the United States. Sweden, Portugal, Spain, Germany, France, and Italy all suspending those drug vaccinations following reports of blood clots. Several other European nations also putting on the brakes. This as the World Health Organization and European safety regulators say there is no scientific evidence of a link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and recent deaths across Europe from blood clots. Well, here at home, President Biden is looking at a major tax hike to pay for his economic programs, increases not seen for 30 years, including raising the corporate rate from 21% to 28%, a higher income tax on individuals making more than $400,000 a year, and increasing capital gains taxes for people who earn more than $1 million a year. The Tax Policy Center projecting that would raise $2.1 trillion over a decade, the administration needing the money to pay for an upcoming infrastructure and jobs package. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich told Fox News it's really about funding Democratic interest groups.
They've got to get the money from somewhere. They're going to borrow as much as they can, and then they're going to come after every hardworking American, every American business, large and small. And they're going to use really nice sounding rhetoric, but the truth is they want to put their hand in your wallet to take out your money to give to their allies. And that's the number one reality of this machine.
And Pat, congressional Republicans are expected to put up a fight over any new taxes.
You know, I want to say something. We've got to be careful. They're talking now about a so-called wealth tax. And Elizabeth Warren wants to see a wealth tax. Well, okay, we're going to take a piece of your money. Now, I'll tell you what happened in Cyprus. They started having some real problem over there. So what did they finally do to pay for their spending or their deficit policies or whatever they had? They literally took a piece of the savings accounts in the banks, confiscated it, and put in place government bonds, which didn't have much value, and took the money to pay for their programs. And as I'm sitting here right now, I'll tell you, it'll come to that sooner or later. As the government continues this reckless spending, how are they going to start paying their bills? Well, they'll start doing it by a wealth tax. They want to put a wealth tax on first, and then it'll be not a wealth tax, it'll be a confiscation of your IRA. Think of all the money that's sitting around in IRAs. Well, what a wonderful pot of gold to pay for reckless government spending. It's coming to that. Just keep it in mind that this is something that will be done. It was done before, and it'll be done again. And they just will say, well, we're going to give you government bonds instead. Yeah, sure. At what value are they going to have at the time? But can you think of all the money that's in the IRAs, the 401ks, and all that that's been saved up by the American people? Well, what a wonderful treasure trove. And if they have a wealth tax, that'll be next. So just, how about stopping your spending? How about stopping all these lavish pensions that are being paid to city workers? How about cutting down on your payrolls? They're not going to do that. They're going to try to punish the productive sector of this society. Bad news. Just keep in mind it's coming. Shouldn't, but it will. John?
Pat, as the humanitarian crisis on the border grows more urgent, Republicans are slamming President Biden for his slow response. In a visit to the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas, Monday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and 12 Republican lawmakers blamed the surge in migrants and the thousands of children held in adult detention cells on the president's policies.
But what's happening right now is beyond a crisis. It's a human heartbreak. For our President of the United States to ignore it, not acknowledge it, or not do something to stop and save the lives, the health of this nation, the safety and security of Americans and our border is the job of the President. He is the one who created this, and he is the one who can fix it.
Border detention shot up by 28% in February. March is on pace to go even higher, right now averaging 4,000 a day. Well, for the private prison industry, locking up humans is a major money-making enterprise with companies raking in billions. For some, however, that raises ethical problems, and now they're pushing to end it. CBN's Jennifer Wishon has more details in our ongoing series, Nation of Criminals.
Locking up criminals is expensive, and for decades, the federal government has relied on private companies to help lessen the load. But today, this controversial industry's days may be numbered. One of his first actions in office, President Joe Biden used his executive pen to begin unraveling the partnership. directing the Department of Justice not to renew its contracts with the facilities, a move designed to promote racial equity.
This is the first step to stop corporations from profiting off of incarceration that is less humane and less safe, as the studies show.
A 2016 Inspector General's report found private prisons had more safety and security incidents than public ones over a 4-year period. It's a partnership that's long been controversial.
I think people feel like there's something distinctly morally repugnant about paying cash to put people in cages.
But industry insiders and even some criminal justice experts say Biden's move is nothing more than a feel-good nod to activists.
So if President Biden wanted to take on mass incarceration in a meaningful way, he would address the overwhelming number of prisoners who are in state-run facilities and not the 9% that are in contract facilities.
Of the 152,000 federal inmates incarcerated, today only about 14,000 are housed at privately managed facilities. And Wilkes says just 300 of those are U.S. citizens. The rest are criminal aliens who will be deported after completing their sentences. Day One Alliance, a trade group for private prisons, was formed to reduce the industry's public stigma. And Wilkes argues in ending their partnership, the federal government is throwing out an important tool.
When Vice President Harris was Attorney General of California, the state was under a court mandate to address the unconstitutional overcrowding that was occurring. And so the industry was brought in as a tool and as a partner to help with that.
Professor Pfaff says if used correctly, the private industry could make positive changes. He suggests if contracts were written differently, ones that did not pay per prisoner per diem rates, but instead based funding on goals, such as reduced recidivism risks, then the private prisons would focus on things other than just warehousing people. In other words, let the business model work for society by tying profits to results that benefit inmates rather than paying for the number of prisoners. As it currently stands, private facilities stand to benefit from locking up more people, which some argue encourages repeat offenders. And many critics can't forget the shocking 2012 deal pitched by Corrections Corporation of America, now known as CoreCivic. The company would purchase prisons in 48 states if those states would guarantee a 90% occupancy rate. CBN's request to learn when the first DOJ contracts will end, thus potentially beginning to shutter some of these private prisons, was not answered by either the White House or Bureau of Prisons, but the process will likely take years and can be reversed by the next administration unless Congress acts. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Pat, I know in the past you've voiced your concerns about private for-profit prisons.
Terrible thing is they get a percentage of the take on the occupancy. They have to be guaranteed a 90% occupancy if they build a prison, which means they've got to keep people locked up, or the state has got to arrest more people and put them in jail. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible, it's the devil's bargain on this thing. But we've done a thing on the nation of criminals. We have more people incarcerated than any other nation on the face of the earth. I mean, I'm talking about greater than mainland China and Russia. And we have so many offenses. There are hundreds of thousands of laws that can be broken. And the thing that I think that should be repealed are the prison sentences that are given by agencies that are not given by the federal government, but are given by agencies, which in turn they have, if you do this, you're going to jail. So every little bureaucrat wants to punish people for not keeping their rules. And so you shoot a crow or something and they put you in jail, or you pollute a waterway and they put you in jail, and it goes on and on and on. We cannot tell. There are hundreds of thousands of crimes that every American should be aware of, and we should do something about it. And there's been prison reform, but they haven't begun to scratch the surface. And of course, you can imagine the amount of incarceration that went on because of some amount of drug offenses. I'm not in favor of using marijuana, but I do think decriminalizing marijuana was a major step, but they still haven't done it as they should have. And you go down the line, the enormous penalty that we pay for locking people up. And that was the big cry a few years ago, lock them up. I'm tough on crime. And so people got elected for being tough on crime. Well, we've crowded our prisons. It's a terrible burden on our economy. And worse than that, what it does to people's lives, their families, their futures, their hopes, it's just shocking. And we need to get a handle on it. I know President Trump did a little bit, but it was just a palliative considered to what needs to be done. But we've focused on nation of criminals. We'll keep on focusing on it because we've got to stop this. We cannot keep locking people up. This isn't the way you treat somebody. And think what it does to the families. Think what it does to the children. Think what it does to the spouse that's not in prison. I mean, you go down the line, it's horrible.